Welcome back to the Random Sound Mind podcast. I'm your host, JT. Today's episode is in light of the recent bombings, which you no doubt have heard, with America bombing Iran along with Israel. So on February 28th, which was this past Saturday, the Ayatollah Khamenei was killed, along with a lot of his top leaders. I'm also doing this episode in light of what also happened this past weekend, which was an attempted massacre in my home state of Texas. From what I remember, 3 people were killed and 14 injured. As I said in episode 14, where I covered 3 things about Islam that I thought that you who tune in need to know, something I've studied for over 2 decades, I was going to do installments on Islam because I feel like the awareness of what its doctrines are, what its theology is, what its practices, the life of Muhammad, things like that are important because of the spread of Islam in the West. The things that come along Western civilization, we call Western values. Those things that make the West great is incompatible with Islam, and the growth and spread in the United States is unmistakable. Even, especially in my home state of Texas, it's growing. We already saw what happened in New York with that buffoon mayor they elected. So congratulations, New York. Good job. There's 3 things I'm going to go over today in this episode about what do Muslims think of non-Muslims. Again, I shouldn't have to say this with anything, but that doesn't mean all Muslims, of course. But I'm going to give it straight from what their doctrines, what their leaders, what their Quran, what the Hadith has said. The first point is that Muslims think of non-Muslims as infidels. Again, not all, but infidel, right? There's 2 words, in meaning not, fidel, we get fidelity, faith. So non-believer, doubter. But did you know the Arabic? Kafir, sometimes pronounced kafir, and the plural. So if you're looking on the screenshots I've put up, I've done for kafir or the plural kafir, but I'm not going to read the whole thing. Kafir, disbeliever, unbeliever, and it basically says it denies or rejects the existence of the Prophet Muhammad, divine revelations of Islam, the tenets of Islam, those kind of things. But I want you to notice in this screenshot for kafir, notice to cover or conceal. The difference is nuanced, but it's there. So let's take a look at a short video from the Center for the Study of Political Islam.
I would like to talk to you about the worst word in any language, kafir, K-A-F-I-R. It's an Arabic word, and usually it's translated, and the translations are non-believer or infidel. But those don't fully convey the negativity, harshness, and evil of the word kafir. You see, a kafir is hated by Allah, and a large portion of the Quran is written about the kafir. They're lower than animals. They're despised, demeaned. They're deliberately concealing the truth of Islam. Because the Arabic word kafir really means to cover, conceal. So what the word says is, oh, I know the beauty and awesomeness of Islam, but I'm covering it up and concealing it. Therefore, the kafir is one who willfully rejects Islam and is hated by Allah. A Muslim refers to me as kafir. He's reflecting Allah's opinion.
Right, exactly. Never forget, this ideology is different than Hitler's Nazism. It's different than even communism because it's tied to an eternal source, Allah, their God. So therefore, if it's eternal and the decrees are eternal, it never ends.
But the word kafir means that you're a horrible person, the worst of people, destined to burn in hell.
Again, from the same Center for the Study of Political Islam. And just want to read you, here's what the Quran says, chapter 2, verse 217. But it is worse in Allah's eyes to deny others the path to Him, to disbelieve in Him, to drive His worshippers out of the sacred mosque. Idolatry is a greater sin than murder. Idolatry meaning you don't worship their God, Allah. And the book goes on to say from the editor, those who argued against Islam and resisted Islam could be killed as a sacred act. So murder was ordained, sanctified, because you're resistant. as a kafir. This is another book. Again, I'll put up a screenshot, but just to show you that I actually have it, I'm reading from it. It is the hardest book I've ever had to read just because of how graphic it was. And it's about the first 1400 years of Islam as it pertains to Christianity and their havoc and the hell and it was hell on earth for people in those days. As one researcher summarizes, non-Muslims are described in the Quran as vile animals and beasts, the worst of creatures and demons, perverted transgressors and partners to Satan. They are to be beheaded, terrorized, annihilated, crucified, punished, and expelled, and plotted against by deceit. That's what the Quran thinks if you're a non-Muslim. I hope you heard that. Is how they view you, is how they can justify in their hearts and minds to do such horrific things as they've done since its founding, by the way. I want to move now to my second point. In Islam, there are two houses. There's Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. So Dar al-Islam, House of Islam, or Abode of Islam. I'm going to put up some screenshots of while I'm talking about this. Also, Dar al-Harb, House of War, or Abode of War. So just right there, think about that. Look at the name they put to it. This is from the early jurisprudence of Islam. Islam or war. You're either with us or against us. Very binary. Islam is very binary. War is to be committed upon you until you submit. Remember, Islam means what? Submission. It's for them, but it's also for people who aren't Muslim. Okay? Center for Political Islam. This is the famous verse of the sword. Now, if you don't know anything about Islam, Surah 9:5, chapter 9, verse 5 is one of the most infamous. It's called nicknamed the verse of the sword. And here's what it says. Kill the unbelievers wherever you find them, take them as captives, besiege them, and lie in wait for them with every kind of ambush. If they submit to Islam, observe prayer, and pay the poor tax, then let them go their way. Allah is gracious and merciful. Doesn't sound like it, but sword and scimitar. Page 174. Christians and Jews who acquiesce to Muslims were ruled as dhimmis, in keeping with the Quran's command to make infidels feel humbled. Surah 9:29. Jizya, or a tax, were collected, and the collectors were advised to hold the infidels by the throat during payment and yell, "O dhimmi, enemy of Allah, pay the jizya, or the tax, that you owe us for protection and tolerance we grant you." What is a dhimmi? D-H-I-M-M-I, another Arabic word. Just think, when you think dhimmi, think servant or slave or second-class citizen. Second-class citizen might be the best, but all kinds of laws were put over you as dhimmi. And it was only usually extended to Christians and Jews, or what Muslims call people of the book. If you were a polytheist in that time, or you were an out-and-out atheist, you had no chance. They'd kill you on the spot most times. But because you were a Christian or Jew, they would make you a dhimmi if they didn't kill you. If any of you are familiar with mafia movies, that's what it was. Protection tax. You have to pay us in order to live and exist in our society. There are two specific laws. One, it's blasphemy to say anything negative about Islam, Allah, or Muhammad. The second one is called the apostasy law, which some of you may have heard of. If you leave Islam, you also are penalized. You criticize them, their religion, Muhammad, death. If you leave the religion, death. Ponder that for a second, compared to all the other world religions. Name me another one that it's mandated that happen. From this book, page 35 of the footnotes. This is what it talks about in the dhimmi system. The entrenched dhimmi system, which saw increasingly impoverished native Egyptians slowly convert to Islam over the centuries. The observation of a Lord Alfred Butler, a 19th century historian, talked about the concerning institution of jizya. Again, that tax, that protection tax. He refers to it as a vicious system of bribing the Christians into conversion. Some of the oldest Christians on the planet, the Coptic Christians, if you don't know that, were put in social bondage and financial bondage. What do I mean? Socially, you're in a system where you have no rights. or very few rights. You got to operate, everything has to be operated as a dhimmi, as a second class citizen, which means where you ate, where you sat, what you could do, where you could build, all these things were subject to that. Then there's the financial bondage, which is what? You pay us a jizya, this tax, or there's consequences. Just think about it. You're in bondage, and over. What if you weren't making a lot of money? No such thing as capitalism back then. It's bartering. So you didn't have money to pay. And it got increasingly harder and harder. And think about that. If you're a Egyptian Coptic Christian, you can convert and all that can go away. All that pressure that's on you day after day after day will go away if you just convert. If you don't, it's going to get harder and harder and harder. If you didn't pay, they may just say, all right, well, off with your head. Or you have to move somewhere else. This is part of being in, as I'm saying, the house of war. So if you don't die and they conquer you, you're going to live as a second-class citizen, which doesn't even do it justice. It's really a slave. Page 11 of Sword and Scimitar. Islam's three choices had come to Jews and Christians, the dhimmis. Either they convert, they died fighting, or they kept their religion by paying certain extortion money. That's another way of saying it. Mafia, right? Extortion. And thereby accepting an inferior position as dhimmis in Muslim society. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie 300 with Gerard Butler and the Spartans of ancient Greece who fought the Persians. It has all the cool special effects based on real history. If you watch it, there are three options given to the Spartans. Convert. Join us, fight in our army, as all these other people, part of their army, have already done. Remember, he says that to them. Second thing, you can war against us and you're probably going to die. The third option is you can pay us, remember he says earth and water. You can pay us a tribute. You can give us what we need, food, shelter, which is basically their form of a tax. I can't say this definitively, but I think Islam, because it was in that culture after that time, it just simply took from that and said, those are your three options. What do you think happens when Muslims finally take over? Do you think they're going to let it slide, or are they going to make you a dhimmi, as they have done for centuries and centuries? Dar al-Harb, House of War, and Dar al-Islam, House of Islam. If you take those first 2 points I've given you about how Muslims view you, leads me to my third point, which is, what is Islam's ultimate goal then? It's to dominate the world, to take over, to impose their religion, and for about 20 to 30%, if not more, want to impose Sharia upon the entire world. Makes sense, right? If you're an unbeliever, and if you're in the house of war, we've got to battle you and submit you and conquer you and subjugate you. Not every Muslim holds that. But it dang sure should be a question that you might want to ask if you're buddies with a Muslim. Hey, do you think you guys should take over the entire world? Impose your religion, I should say, on the entire world? Islam appeals to males. Why? There are two things I think in our male nature that we must battle. There's two in the female, but the two for the male is a propensity to violence and sexual lust. Whether you're 15 or 95, men have to battle that. But that religion condones them both. So you're not battling anything. You're encouraged to let that base nature of violence and sexual lust, a lust for violence and a lust for women. And of course, as we know, they also rape little boys. So if everything is to be conquered, how can they do that? Well, you've definitely heard the word jihad. And to think it's just open out war called soft forms of jihad, which is, hey, let's just move into this little town in Texas and just set up our own deal, our own court system. Here's another way. Let's get elected to office. Ilhan Omar, anybody? A bunch of new reps in Minnesota and state reps that are Muslim. Hey, how about New York City with that buffoon up there? Use the American system against them to take them over. Why do it by force when you can do it by deception? Remember Taqiyya, what I talked about earlier in that episode 14? Taqiyya is the doctrine of deception. Let me read again from this book. The spread of Islam by arms is a religious duty upon Muslims in general. Must continue to be done until the whole world is under the rule of Islam. So again, if you have a Muslim friend or acquaintance who says, well, jihad is this inner spiritual struggle, no, no, no. They could be a very moderate or non-practicing Muslim, and maybe they really mean that. But their documents, their scholars, the majority, especially the ones that are, in the Middle East, they're not westernized, would say, no, 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 it's somewhat of a spiritual struggle. But the main point is, again, Dar al-Harb, we're going after the house of war through force. If we can do it by deception, great. And we've got to dominate the entire world. This is the point 3 I'm making. Before this recent Ayatollah was blown up, there was another Ayatollah. There's only been 2 before him who reigned from 79 to 89. In 1989, the one who got blown up took over. Some of his last words before he was blown to smithereens. It doesn't matter if we die. Iran is not important. Islam is important. Now, his supposed last address was February 17th, saying the U.S. is in decline. They're headed towards a collapse. He mentioned the U.S. economy and our society are cratering. In part, I agree with them about the economy. We're $38 trillion in debt. About our society, where we've let trans and all this other nonsense run over, and we've lost our own view on Western civilization and human rights and dignity. He went on to say the U.S. military will not do anything against him. And then he kind of contradicts himself and says, well, if the U.S. kills me, it's not a loss as long as we adhere to Shia, which is a form of Islam. Another book that I have from my library that you can see is this one. I may put up a screenshot, Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam by Robert Spencer, it says, this is Quran 973, chapter 973. O Prophet, strive hard against the unbelievers and the hypocrites, and be firm against them. Their abode is hell, an evil refuge indeed. There are hundreds of references like this. Remember, I said this episode is tied to the Iran bombings, but also to a second thing which hits home here as a Texas resident, which was the massacre, an attempted massacre of more, of a Muslim in a crowded bar on a very popular street in Austin, Texas. I'll put some screenshots up. But this man that you're looking at shot up and tried to kill as many as he could. I think it was around 2 a.m. in the morning. If you're a kafir, if you're in the house of war, and if Islam is supposed to dominate the world, those 3 points I gave today, you should not be shocked anymore when you hear Muslim tries to commit a massacre, whether it be by car, by gun, by knife, by bomb. That's their religion. This picture of this guy, what does this hoodie say? Property of Allah. Dead giveaway that he's a Muslim. And there's a picture side by side when they lifted up, when they shot him. Hey, look at that. He's got an Iran t-shirt on. Was he part of a sleeper cell? I don't know. Are there sleeper cells in America? You better believe it. The war has come to us and has for decades. And I think America better wake up. I think Texas is waking up. Because yesterday we had the primaries here in Texas. And guess what was on the ballot that I voted for, besides the people running for office? We had propositions, right? From everything from taxes to infrastructure. But thank God, you know what they put on there? Sharia law is prohibited in the state of Texas. Everywhere. And thank God some of the people I voted for plan on going after Islam and stopping them from expanding, stopping them from taking over and creating little enclaves like in Dearborn, Michigan. That proposition to ban Sharia law in Texas, guess how many people voted yes? Guess what percentage? 95%. Okay? So thank God we're awake. We need to continue to be awake. So does America. And this stupid, silly notion by President W. Bush calling Islam a religion of peace after they bombed the World Trade Center. Oh, it's a religion of peace. Nowhere in their documents does it say that. And I could show you quote after quote of Muslim scholars, imams, which is their word for basically pastor or priest, saying we're not a religion of peace. We are a religion of war upon the house of war. We're supposed to participate in jihad. In fact, here are some quotes that I'm going to put up on the screen if you want to take a look. That this is their duty to participate in jihad, that we are to be continuous state of war. Again, recall the second point, the two houses. So I'm not going to read this, but just look at these screenshots I've put up. Okay, that's all for this episode. Again, these are 3 things about Islam that I wanted you, my subscribers, and my audience to know. Feel free to share this with other people to get them informed of what this is about. And until next time, stay alert, stand firm, show courage, and be sound.